Hey, this is Jacob Ambrose. I'm a WCA delegate for Georgia. You're listening to the Cornercutter podcast.
Hey, welcome to the Cornercutter podcast. Podcasting since 2014. I'm your host, Josh. Check out the podcast website, thecornercutterpodcast.com. And this is the podcast all about cubing and how to improve. Why don't you shoot me an email? Let me know you're listening. My email address is feedback@thecornercutterpodcast.com. Back from a week off, I have been working on a few things for the podcast and also working on getting the interviews for this week's show. Today we're talking all about the regional championships. I'm bringing on 3 WCA delegates. The 3 are Matthew McMillan, Jacob Ambrose, and Ryan Jew. They organized the Northeast, Southern, and West Coast championships. Before I bring you that, though, I would just like to give a few updates. The Cornercutter podcast giveaway went pretty well. Thank you to everybody who entered. And then something I did recently was magnetizing my Ling-Ao clock. I'll tell you guys all about that in next week's episode, and I'll do a little mini review as well, letting you know what I did and how it turned out. So for this week's episode, we are diving into how the CubingUSA Regional Championships went. So let's jump into the first interview with WCA Delegate Matthew McMillan. Okay, now I have Matthew McMillan, organizer of the Northeast Championships, and Matthew was featured on episode 17 of the Cornercutter podcast. Matthew, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Okay, let's jump right into it. You're the first of the 3 delegates I will be having on this episode. So, when did you first hear about the possibility of having regional championships? What was your first reaction and thoughts?
Well, we actually had the idea of having a regional championship before CubingUSA's regionals proposal. So it would have been unofficial in that case, because I know there was another regional championship that people seemed to enjoy. So we heard a little bit of demand about having something like that in the Northeast. So I and some other local delegates and organizers started to talk about it and try to figure out something. And then shortly after that, CubingUSA came out with their regionals proposal.
Mm-hmm. What were your first impressions of the regional map? Did you think it was split up pretty well?
Yeah, I thought so. I mean, there were a couple of oddities in various places, but it's really hard to split up the whole country like that, especially when cubing communities can be pretty split up even within states.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what was the process of putting in an application? Did you start planning before CubingUSA, like location and stuff like that, or did you still have to put in an application?
Well, we kind of formed a team, but in the end, as you probably know, it was just myself and JP Bullman doing the actual organization, so our team didn't really work out. So we were trying to plan well before we even put in an application, because that process hadn't even existed yet. But we didn't get a whole lot done just because of the difficulty of finding an appropriate venue with the right size and the right price.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the states you searched through? Did you plan to have it in Connecticut the whole time, or were you looking in Mass as well?
We were mostly looking at Connecticut and New Jersey just to have a fairly central location for the entire region, so no one would really have to take a plane, because having it at one of the extremes would be very far away for the other people. But we weren't opposed to having it elsewhere. We did have a potential lead in a different state, but that ended up not working out.
How did you decide on which events to hold? Did CubingUSA have any recommendations on what they wanted?
No, I mean, JP and I just sat down and planning for a 2-day competition because we really couldn't make it 3 days. Firstly, due to cost, but also a lot of people just would not be able to make it on Friday. And we tried to stuff in every event we could, pretty much starting with the most popular ones. And people were pretty upset that we didn't get every single event in, but it was really a function of whether we wanted more people or more events, and we wanted to have a balance.
Did you have any major problems leading up to the day of the competition or even during the competition?
I wouldn't say any huge crises, but both JP and I were doing this for the first time, so we were learning a lot as we were going. And then the competition actually went really smoothly. There was nothing major. There were just the usual incidents that happen at every competition.
Now, could you run through what happened the 2 days? Were there any records broken? Any fun moments? Could you share about that?
Well, I think the entire competition, I was pretty stressed out going into it, and JP was as well, but it actually went really smoothly, so that was a positive note for us. One issue was that there was a scheduling problem, and the 3x3 finals ended up having to be run in a separate room. But it ended up being kind of a nice place to have the 3x3 finals, so that wasn't the biggest issue. I don't think there were any major records. There might have been a few that I wasn't aware of, though.
How was the feedback from competitors?
After, it was surprisingly positive. Leading up, there was a whole lot of criticism. People were really not happy with how the whole thing was organized. Much of the complaints were that we didn't get every event, and also that it was expensive. But the problem is that with a competition of this size, you're going to have to either make it very expensive or have fewer competitors or have fewer events. You can't really have all three at the same time. So we had to make some cuts in some places, and a lot of people weren't very happy with it. So I wasn't expecting very good feedback at all, but surprisingly at the competition, everyone I talked to said they were having a great time. Both parents and competitors seemed to be enjoying themselves there. So I guess the people who were not happy with the organization ended up largely not going or something, because everyone who was there seemed pretty happy with it.
That's great. How did you do personally solving?
Yeah, to be honest, that was like the absolute last thing on my mind. So I don't even remember how I did. I don't think I did very well, probably. But I was very busy running the stages and trying to coordinate staff and making sure there weren't any major disasters. So a lot of the times when I'm organizing or taking a big role in a competition, competing is kind of not my main focus. So I can't really recall how I did.
What was your second biggest competition besides this one?
Like that I've organized, or
that you've delegated?
I think Lexington Summer, the last one, was pretty big. It was like over 200 competitors, and we had to use 2 rooms for it. I don't know if I was an organizer or a delegate at that time. I might not have been a delegate yet, but that was a very large competition too. Well, the championship was far more professional, and I don't mean that as a criticism of the organizers of Lexington Summer, including myself, but the Northeast Championship took place at a hotel. It was much more expensive because of the higher level of professionalism, but it was also a lot harder to plan just because of how high the stakes were for everything with the big hotel ballroom and all that. So it was different in some ways. It was easier to plan the Lexington competition, but there was also a lot of work done for us in the Northeast Championship because the hotel would set up the room however we wanted and coordinate things like that.
Now, what do you see for the future of the regional championships? Will this be a recurring thing for every year, or maybe every other year?
I don't know. That's a good question. We had pretty low turnout at our competition. The cap was 350, and I don't think we even got to 200. That might be because it was announced late due to a couple of issues. I have a feeling that was also just because it was in the summer and a lot of people have summer plans. But if you're going to look at it like that, then there really is no perfect time to have a regional championship. And then the other option is that maybe people just aren't that interested in a regional championship and would prefer to just have bigger local competitions. So I guess it really depends on what CubingUSA wants to do. Personally, I'm not going to be putting in an application to do the next one. It was an unbelievable amount of stress, and I really wasn't prepared to deal with all that on top of all the other things I have going on in my life. So maybe somebody else will put in an application. So we'll have to see what happens. But I'm excited to see where this goes, whether it grows into something big or whether we have alternatives for people who don't really want to do these championships.
Okay, well, that sounds great. Thank you, Matthew, for putting all the effort into organizing. It's a huge part in supporting the community.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I want to thank Matthew again for coming on the podcast a second time. And now let's move right along to the interview with Jacob Ambrose. Okay, now I have Jacob Ambrose from the CubingUSA Southeast Championship. Jacob, welcome.
Hello.
So to get started, why don't we jump right into the first question. When did you first hear about the possibility of the CubingUSA regional championships? What was your reaction and first thoughts?
Yeah, so back whenever I became a delegate in 2016, there was actually talk among people like Kit Clement and Walker Welsh about having these regional championships. And so a couple of us had already decided to plan some for 2017. And that's where you saw like the North West Championship. I think Heartland had a championship and the Southern Championship. Unfortunately, the Southeast didn't get a championship that year, and I was just we couldn't get the right venue at the right time and get it announced or anything, but that was fine. And then shortly after those took place in the summer of 2017, CubingUSA decided to more formalize it and make it to where these competitions will have financial backing to do what they want, as well as make them kind of more uniform and really make it kind of where every state's going to have their own regionals instead of, well, the Southeast didn't take Mississippi and the Southern Championship didn't take Mississippi, so Mississippi doesn't have a regional championship. So CubingUSA kind of orchestrated a lot of that.
Now, what was the process of putting in an application? Did you have any competition with other delegates putting in applications?
I actually have no idea about the competition for like other people putting in applications. I never really got information on that. But what I ended up doing was I kind of made a team that was very focused around the community. So I brought in delegates from all over the region. There were 3 from Georgia. There was the delegate in Florida. And then we later added the delegate for North Carolina into that mix. And as well, we had an organizer from Florida and an organizer from Tennessee. So it was more of the whole Southeast coming together as one instead of, Georgia submitting their application and North Carolina submitting their application and Florida submitting an application, that kind of thing. And it made for a lot better of a competition. We all really we had more experience on the team because we were so widespread in that regard. And I don't know who else put in an application. I doubt anybody from the Southeast actually put in an application, but there might have been other people from other regions that put in an application for Southeast Championship, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, how did you decide on events? Were you able to host most of them?
Yeah, so the WCA has 18 events, and we hosted all of them. And we decided to put focus on what the Southeast is good at. And those events included, if you looked at the psych sheet for those comps, the solving a Rubik's Cube with your feet had like 3 or 4 of the top 10 in the world. And then clock also had like 5 people within top 30 or something. It was pretty ridiculous. And then we also had a lot of good people in 4x4. So we had a lot of rounds of those events, and it ended up being a lot of fun for everybody.
Yeah, I really liked that. Was there any problems leading up to the competition, maybe with organizing or any major things happening even during the competition?
Yeah, like so we had about 120-ish people out of expected 220, let's say. And so that kind of does put a financial hurt on the competition. And I think all the regionals experienced this a little bit. Basically, what we did to overcome it was we really focused out and partitioned out what we wanted, what we needed, and what we ultimately couldn't have. And some of what we ultimately couldn't have actually made it into what went on at the competition, like photography. We hired a photographer to take pictures of everybody, and that ended up not getting paid for by CubingUSA, so it came out of the organizers' pockets. But other than that, it was pretty smooth sailing. Not a whole lot of issues. Everybody just kind of worked together to make sure everything fit.
Could you run through the 3 competition days? Was there any major world records? I know Daniel Rose-Levine got the feet world record.
Yeah, so on the first day, we had the staff competition. Nobody set records there. And then after that, we also had, I think, a round of an attempt of FMC. I think that's all we had that day. And then the next day, Saturday, it actually had the first 2 rounds of feet. And during the first round of feet, DRL actually set the world record for feet by like 0.1 seconds. But Tommy Cherry also set the world record during that round, and that was beaten by like a second or 2. And so he was actually credited with a world record that day. And how records work is for every calendar day, only one world record in that event can be set unless it's like tied. So it didn't matter that Daniel Rose-Levine got the feet world record the next day. Tommy still got his world record on that Saturday, which is pretty cool. And then on Sunday, the only record was DRL's feet world record of like 23 seconds, which is ridiculous.
Cool. Any other really fast times or interesting things that happened during the championship?
I have a personal one, if that works.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at the clock podium, that's my main event and the one that I really like. But in first place was Carson Claude with a 7:28 average, and second place was a 7:32 average, so 0.04 difference. And third place was a 7.34 average by Silas, and that's a 0.02 difference. And then I'm sitting there in fourth with a 7:38 average. So I was only 0.1 away from winning because I had the fastest single. So even if I tied, I would have beat whoever I tied. And I was 0.04 away from getting a podium. So that was pretty interesting.
Wow.
Also, the clock final was I'm pretty sure it's the only final in all the regional championships that had only people in the region in that final, if that makes sense. So
Wow.
everybody in clock final was from the Southeast.
Did that make it a lot easier for awarding prizes? Also, how did awarding the regional champions go?
Yeah, so the Southeast is kind of cool, and we held up our own against people like Daniel Rose Levine, who came in and kind of was on the psych sheet for first and everything. But the Southeast came in first in every event, or like a Southeast person came in first in every event except for feet, which is understandable because Daniel got the world record. So you can't really be mad about that. But other than that, we had trophies for, or no, we had plaques for everybody that podiumed, and then medals for all the Southeast champions. And so every first place got a plaque and a medal, and then for feet, the second place, which was Kevin Min, got the awarded the Southeast champion crown for feet, even though he got second.
What was the feedback you got from competitors?
Overall, competitors really enjoyed this competition. It was a really community-focused competition, and we really focused a lot on making it enjoyable for everybody and making sure that nobody was super stressed, and just trying to make it a pleasing competition for everybody to attend. And I think that that's one of the key aspects that we want to keep going into the future, is just focusing around the community and making sure that, it's the community first, basically.
Mm-hmm. How do you think CubingUSA set up the regional areas? Do you think that was set up well?
I had a say in it, so yeah. Yeah, my main argument was, I guess one of the biggest things around the Southeast was, where does Virginia go? For some reason, they decided that Maryland, no matter what, goes to the Northeast. And it ended up being, well, the Virginia community never comes down to any competition in the South, and they'll go up to Northeast competitions. So let's just put them in the Northeast instead of having them in the Southeast. Other than that, there wasn't really any big questions around what states are in the Southeast. But there was the debate of how many regions are there, because there originally weren't going to be 8 regions. There was only going to be like 4 maybe. And they were going to put Southern and Southeast in the same region, like all that be one region. And it ended up being heavily debated because people that are in Texas would never go to Southeast Regional in Georgia, and people in Georgia, Tennessee, the Carolinas, and Florida, they would never go to Texas for a regional championship. So it really just came down to that, and that's why we divided the 2 regions up, and that was the case for a couple other regions too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
How do you see the future of the regional championships? Will they be happening every year?
I think it kind of depends. If you look at like the competitor numbers for the competitions, they not a single one hit the competitor limit, and they were all about half of what they wanted. And so that kind of is going to put a financial burden on all the competitions, and specifically CubingUSA, because they're financially backing all the regional championships. And it's going to be ultimately up to CubingUSA whether they're going to support these competitions next year or not. I have no idea if they are or not. But regardless if they do or don't, the Southeast has already the Southeast already has plans for Southeast Championship 2019. We already have our organization team. We already know the place, and pretty much have a solid idea on the competition. We're just waiting to see if CubingUSA is going to sponsor these again or not before we get the ball rolling on it.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you for going in depth and explaining some of the behind the scenes stuff. I appreciate that. Also, thank you for taking the time to come on the Cornercutter podcast.
Yeah, no problem.
I want to thank Jacob again for coming on the podcast, and I really like the detailed information he gave. Let's move on to the interview with Ryan Jew. Okay, now I have Ryan Jew from the CubingUSA Western Championship. Ryan, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So to get started, why don't you tell us about when you first heard about the possibility of there being regional championships? What was your first reaction?
Well, this was the first year they decided to hold regionals in all 7 regions of the U.S. And I basically found out when they announced that there's an open application. And I want to say that was around September of last year. They just had the CubingUSA made a post, and they just said, if you're interested in organizing a regional, apply with this form. So yeah, that's when I found out about it.
Okay. What were your expectations? Was there anything that CubingUSA didn't meet, or that you really enjoyed, that you thought CubingUSA did a good job with?
I think one thing that was interesting was like the competitions were actually smaller than I thought. I think a lot of people went in expecting like 300-person comps, and they ended up being quite a bit smaller. But I think that ended up being okay, except for the financials.
What happened with that?
I think there's just too many big comps, and fewer people were interested in showing up to them. But I think they were fun for the people who did go to them.
Okay. So how did you decide on which events to hold?
Basically, there's like kind of a pecking order of events in general. Like we saw if we could hold every event, and then when we decided it was too difficult to hold every single event at the regional, we decided to cut clock and feet from Western Regional, for example. We just thought, based on interest, those were the least important to hold.
Did you get any bad feedback about not holding those? I was talking with Matthew McMillan earlier, and that was a big complaint because they weren't able to hold not quite all the events in the Northeast Championship.
Well, Northeast, they definitely, at least the original announcement, they definitely had fewer events than the ones I did. I personally didn't get any serious complaints about not holding clock and feet, just because even though some people do take them seriously, it's very few, and I think they're kind of used to not having those events everywhere. Northeast went a little bit further, I'd say, to the point where more people complained.
Okay. What do you think about the argument that the regional championships are for qualifying for nationals? Is this something CubingUSA thought about or intended?
I think one interesting thing is they didn't, on the application, I guess they had it in mind for that, but when I applied, I actually thought that a lot of these regionals would be later in the year, just because in the past years, they had regionals actually, but they were all held after nationals. I originally thought the entire point was just to have like a competition, but I kind of see the point that they're making, that holding a lot of events helps people qualify for nationals.
Yeah, that's something I saw quite a bit on the forums, people discussing that. Could you run through the competition days? Please mention any world records, and please share any funny or interesting stories as well.
All right. Well, Western Regional started on Friday, but Friday was just the staff comp.
Okay. Tell us a little more about what a staff competition is and
Okay.
how it's run differently than the regular competition.
Okay. Well, in a normal competition, you usually have a staff, but they kind of compete with everyone else. So I don't know. Let's just say you have like 20 staff members, and like let's say you have 4 groups. You'd probably put about like 5 staff members in each group, and that's how you'd run your comp. But for a bigger comp, it's pretty difficult to have staff competing all the time, especially with smaller events with fewer groups. So what we do is we hold a staff comp the day before, where staff will compete in all the round 1 events, and that really saves a lot of time. For example, like we held 7x7 during staff comp, and then on the day of, we only needed 1 group of 7x7, so that ran really fast.
So you're able to catch up or get some extra time, which was probably nice.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think we could have run it the normal way. Also, I guess you could, but you also want to make it so normal people can show up on just Saturday and Sunday. That way you only require staff to show up Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a big plus. Any fun or interesting stories you can remember?
Definitely Max Park getting the 5x5 world record. That was just really exciting.
Hey, I recently got some feedback from a listener.
Yes, I listened to that podcast.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, I decided to listen to one. That was the one.
Great. So, in regards to that, for people who haven't listened to that show, he was talking about how Kevin Hayes made the world record a big deal and people were really loud. Could you explain the regulation that the WCA has for cases like this?
Yeah, so in general, if anything at the competition is unreasonably distracting, that could be like your judge like cubing, or people talking really loud, or lighting flickering maybe, or Kevin Hayes. You are allowed to ask for an extra solve, and the delegate will decide if your distraction is distracting enough, I guess. So if you're in that situation, Max Park gets a world record, everyone's really loud, you are allowed to ask for an extra solve, and I would probably grant it to you. I guess, yeah, you shouldn't expect that'll be offered to you. Like, looking back, like, yeah, I should have looked around to see who was solving and asked people if they wanted an extra solve. But it's also important that you ask, because the delegate, they're just one person, they can't watch every single person at every single time. And sometimes distractions are more local. Like, a world record will disturb the whole room, but sometimes maybe one kid's just being really obnoxious or something. I might not see that, So it is important to ask for extra solves.
Yeah, should you stop your attempt or finish your attempt and then ask? But I would
say you should try to finish.
Okay.
Because some people, you might get distracted, but you might still get an okay time and just be like, okay, I'll take it, you could finish. You could almost finish and decide if you want to keep the time,
That makes sense. What were the prizes for the regional champions?
We actually did not get a sponsor for this competition. I think the earlier regionals took so many financial losses that no one wanted to sponsor us, because we were one of the later regionals. So we just gave out certificates as usual.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh, and we gave high fives.
Nice.
I don't know if there's any videos out there, but anyone who podiumed would get a high five from every single staff member. So we had the staff line up, and then you would just run through a tunnel of high fives.
That's pretty cool. How do you think How do you think CubingUSA split up the regions for the U.S.? Do you think they were distributed pretty evenly?
I mean, I think it made sense in general. Like, I don't see a definitely more logical way to do it. Yeah, I mean, it was like, I guess the Western region makes sense. It's like the states that I feel like are closest to me. Yeah, I don't know. Did you have any other people think it was weird?
Not really. A few people, when the map first came out, were a little irritated. Maybe because the Northeast region was a little stretched down far into the south, maybe like Virginia. But otherwise, people thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I maybe would have divided Northeast into like two different regions, but at the same time, you also don't want to have too many regions, I think.
Yeah, the Northeast is kind of hard because you got the cubing community in Maryland area, then New York, New Jersey, and then Massachusetts. So it's kind of
yeah. I mean, at the same time, like even California, like I consider it two different cubing communities just by itself.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I've never competed in Utah, for example, and I've never competed in Hawaii yet. So it's kind of hard to say, like, oh, if I don't compete there, it's not part of my region.
Are you involved in the Hawaii competition at all?
Yeah, I'm organizing it. I'm pretty excited for it.
Oh, awesome. Could you give us some details and, like, the story of how this got started?
I mean, it's kind of been in the works for a while. Like, people have kind of poked at the idea of, hey, you know, like, it'd be a pretty cool vacation if I were in Hawaii and I got to compete. A lot of people are very interested in trying to compete in every state, and that's definitely one of the harder ones to get. Then this year we just managed to pull it together, so
awesome.
Yeah, it should be good.
Are there any other states that haven't had a competition before?
I think there's still like 6 that haven't had competitions.
Okay.
One of them's Alaska, I think. Montana's having their first one in September. I'm gonna be at that one. But yeah, I think pretty soon we'll have all 50 that have had competitions. But of course, some states will very rarely have competitions for a while, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What was the feedback from competitors for the Western Championships?
I think overall people had fun. Like it was a very smooth competition. There was really nothing difficult about the number of people who showed up. I think it was just like it was a good environment. I hope it's bigger in the future, but yeah, I think overall it was a good start.
Speaking of the future, what do you see for the future of the regional championships?
I hope in the future, just maybe in a couple years, the regionals are definitely bigger. I think we have potential for more interest, hopefully. I noticed a lot of locals who maybe don't do a lot of events, they don't want to pay twice as much for the same number of events. But I hope interest picks up and we can have maybe 300-person competitions like our plan was this year. I think in the more immediate future, we're probably not going to have all 7 regions have regionals in the future. That's kind of been what the talk is. So maybe next year we'll have certain regions not have regionals, and then hopefully they won't take financial losses for CubingUSA.
Okay. Well, Ryan, thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast. We had a great discussion.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, that's it. I hope you guys learned something about the national championships. It was interesting to see how they went. Another thing that could be happening soon is state championships, so keep your eyes open for that. As always, if you have any questions or feedback, feel free to email me. My email address is feedback@thecornercutterpodcast.com. I'll have links to the championship web pages on the website in the show notes, thecornercutterpodcast.com. Thank you so much for listening. And now it's time to take this episode back to the scrambling table. And I'll talk to you again next week in episode 44 of the Corner Cutter Podcast. Speaking of championships in the future, what do you see? Wait, let me.
What do I see as the future of the regionals?
Yeah, I gotta re-say that.
Okay, sure.